God told me to warn you. Listen to me carefully. Because what you think is small, what you think is cosmetic, what you think is ordinary, is actually speaking in the spiritual realm louder than your prayers, louder than your tears, louder than your confessions. And you are not aware. I am not here to entertain you. I am not here to flatter you. I am here because God is sounding an alarm, and the alarm is about your hair. You touch it every day. You look at it every day. You style it, hide it, cut it, expose it, neglect it, and yet you do not know what it is declaring before God. You think your life is blocked because of circumstances, but God says there is a sign resting on your head that you have ignored. And until you understand this, you will keep fasting with no result, praying with no breakthrough, and waiting with no movement. Hear me with the seriousness of your destiny. In the spiritual realm, nothing attached to your body is neutral. God never created anything meaningless. From the crown of your head to the soles of your feet, everything carries instruction, alignment, and assignment. Your hair is not just hair. It is a witness. It is a covering. It is a signal. It is a language. And God says many of you are suffering not because you are weak, but because you are unaware. Ignorance does not stop consequences. Ignorance does not silence spiritual laws. Ignorance does not pause divine patterns. God is not angry with you, but God is calling you to awareness, because what you do not understand will continue to control you. When God formed humanity, God did not rush. God was intentional. God breathed purpose into every detail. Hair was placed where it is for a reason. It grows where it grows for a reason. It responds to stress, fear, joy, neglect, and faith, because it is connected to the unseen. God says your hair carries memory. It carries seasons. It carries submission or rebellion. It carries humility or pride. And when you treat it as nothing, you dishonor what God marked as something. Many of you cry asking God, why am I exposed? Why am I vulnerable? Why do I feel uncovered? And God says, look at what you have done with what I placed as a sign of covering. You see, God works with symbols before God works with systems. God speaks through patterns before God releases power. Your hair reveals how you see authority, how you handle patience, how you respond to waiting. Hair grows slowly. Hair cannot be forced without damage. Hair teaches endurance. Hair teaches submission to time. And God says this generation hates anything that grows slowly. You want instant success, instant recognition, instant answers, and without knowing it, you have trained your spirit to despise process, and your hair has been the first victim of that impatience. Some of you are constantly cutting, changing, hiding, and manipulating because you are uncomfortable with who God is forming you to be. You do not like the length God allows. You do not like the texture God permits. You do not like the pace God has chosen, and so you interfere. And God says when you interfere with the sign, you confuse the signal. You wonder why heaven feels silent. Heaven is not silent. Heaven is watching whether you can honor what grows without your control. God told me to tell you that your hair is responding to your spiritual condition faster than your mouth ever could. You say you trust God, but your hands reveal anxiety. You say you are at peace, but your actions reveal restlessness. You say you are submitted, but your constant need to alter what God is shaping reveals resistance. And God says, I am not judging you, I am inviting you to alignment. Because when alignment comes, power flows naturally. There are those listening to me right now whose hair has been thinning, falling, weakening, not merely for physical reasons, but because you have been under prolonged spiritual pressure without rest. God says you have been carrying burdens you were never designed to carry. You have been trying to be God for everyone else. You have been holding responsibilities without releasing control. And your body is crying out in ways your mouth refuses to. God says, release what is not yours and watch restoration begin where loss once lived. Others hear me, and your hair grows fast but never stays healthy. It looks full for a moment, then breaks, then weakens again. God says this reflects cycles in your spiritual life. bursts of passion without foundation, enthusiasm without discipline, movement without direction. You rush ahead of God, then wonder why you are exhausted. God is calling you to consistency, not excitement, faithfulness, not frenzy. When you learn to remain, what grows will stay. There are some of you who cover your hair constantly, not out of reverence, but out of shame. You learned early to hide. You learned early to protect yourself. And God says you are still living from old wounds. Your hair has become a shield instead of a sign. God says, I want to heal the place where you learn to hide. Because until healing comes, you will keep covering what God wants to restore. Listen carefully. In the unseen realm, your head represents authority. What rests on it matters. God says some of you have allowed other voices, other opinions, other fears to rest where only God should rule. You crown anxiety, you crown comparison, you crown insecurity. And then you ask God to bless what God never authorized. God says, remove the false crowns and I will restore the true one. Your hair absorbs environment. It responds to atmosphere. And God says this is why some of you feel spiritually drained after certain conversations, certain places, certain relationships. You are sensitive, but you have not learned discernment. God never called you to absorb everything. God called you to be led, not overwhelmed. God says, guard what surrounds your head because it affects how you hear me. Many of you have prayed for elevation, but you have not learned humility. Hair bows naturally when the head bows. God says, until your spirit learns to bow, promotion will remain delayed. God does not lift what refuses to yield. God does not empower what will not submit. This is not punishment. This is protection. God protects you from rising before you are rooted. There are secrets God places in plain sight, and your hair is one of them. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing you touch is your head. God says, that is your reminder that today begins with alignment. Not with worry, not with planning, not with fear, alignment. Because when the head is aligned, the body follows. Some of you have been fighting God over identity. You want to redefine yourself every season. You are tired of who you are becoming because it requires patience. God says, if you keep cutting off what I am growing, you will never see the full design. Destiny requires length. Calling requires maturity. Authority requires time. I must speak plainly now. There are spiritual coverings that activate when you honor divine order. When you respect what God establishes, protection follows naturally. Many of you are exposed not because God left you, but because you stepped outside the order God set. God says, return and I will cover you again. You think this message is strange because you have been trained to separate the spiritual from the physical. But God never did. God works through the whole being. Your body listens to your spirit. Your hair listens to your faith. When faith is anxious, the body reacts. When faith rests, the body responds. God is calling you into rest, not inactivity, but trust. Some of you are under constant pressure to appear perfect. You cannot allow anything to look unfinished. But God says, I am still working. Hair teaches you to live with the unfinished without panicking. Growth without proof. Progress without applause. God says, if you cannot trust me in small visible things, how will you trust me in invisible ones? God told me to warn you because there is a shift coming. And those who are aligned will move effortlessly, while those who are unaware will struggle unnecessarily. Lie. This is not fear. This is preparation. Awareness brings peace. Understanding brings authority. Your hair has been preaching a sermon you have not listened to. It has been teaching patience, submission, discernment, covering, authority, rest, and identity. And God says, today is the day you stop ignoring the message. Not with superstition, not with fear, but with reverence. God is not asking you to obsess. God is asking you to honor. Honor what grows without noise. Honor what requires time. Honor what responds to environment. Honor what rests on your head as a reminder that authority comes from above, not from effort. As you become aware, things will begin to shift. Confusion will lessen. Rest will increase. Clarity will return, not because of a ritual, but because of alignment. God always responds to alignment. And now, as you sit with this word, God is watching not your reaction, but your posture. Will you dismiss or will you discern? Will you mock or will you meditate? Will you rush away or will you allow this warning to settle into understanding? Because what God is revealing is not about hair alone, but about how you carry what God has placed upon your life, how you steward what grows quietly, how you respond when God works slowly, how you honor the signs before the manifestations, how you align before you ask, how you listen before you speak, how you submit before you rise. Because the next move of God in your life will not begin with noise, but with awareness. And those who understand this will step into what others will keep praying for without ever entering into. God is speaking again, and this time the warning is deeper, because what rests on your head is connected to how you hear God. Many people say they cannot hear God clearly, but God says your posture has blocked your perception. When the head is bowed in anxiety, fear, or pride, the ears do not receive truth accurately. Alignment of the head precedes clarity of the voice. That is why God always calls people to stillness before instruction. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is alignment. And your hair, resting silently, growing patiently, has been inviting you into that stillness every single day. You must understand this. God designed growth to be quiet. Noise belongs to destruction. Creation happens in silence. When God shapes destiny, it does not announce itself. It forms slowly, layer by layer, unseen until the right moment. Your hair mirrors this divine method, and yet you have despised silence. You have feared invisibility. You have rushed seasons God intended to mature you. God says, what you rush, you ruin. What you honor, I establish. There are people listening who are frustrated because life feels delayed. You compare yourself constantly. You measure yourself by other people's outcomes. God says comparison has distorted your discernment. Hair does not grow at the same speed on every head, yet every head was designed to be complete. God says, I did not design you to match others. I designed you to mature fully. When you stop comparing, peace will return. When peace returns, strength will rise. God told me to warn you also, because some of you are treating sacred things casually. You handle your life without reverence. You handle your calling without fear. You handle your body without awareness. And God says, what you treat as common will never carry uncommon power. The head is sacred ground. Authority flows downward. When the head is confused, the body scatters. When the head is aligned, the body obeys. Your hair is positioned at the highest point of your body because God wanted you to remember where direction comes from. Direction does not come from pressure. It does not come from trends. It does not come from approval. Direction comes from God. When you seek direction everywhere else, confusion multiplies. God says, lift your awareness upward again, not in pride, but in dependence. Some of you are suffering from constant mental exhaustion. You cannot rest even when you sleep. God says your mind has been overworked because you have been trying to solve spiritual problems with natural strength. Hair grows while you sleep. You do nothing, yet it continues. God says, learn from this. When you rest in God, what needs to grow will grow without strain. There is also a warning for those who manipulate appearances to control perception. You are more concerned with how things look than how they align. God says appearance, why? Without integrity will always collapse. Hair can be styled to hide damage, but damage remains until treated at the root. God is calling you to root-level faith, not surface-level performance. God is not impressed by what you show. God responds to what you submit. Submission is not humiliation. Submission is agreement with divine order. When you agree with God's order, resistance ends. When resistance ends, flow begins. Many of you are tired because you are resisting what God is forming. Some of you feel spiritually exposed, as if attacks come easily. God says exposure comes when covering is ignored. Covering is not control. Covering is alignment with divine structure. When you place yourself under God's authority, protection follows naturally. You do not have to fight for protection. You align and protection manifests. Your hair also teaches discernment of seasons. There are times when growth slows. There are times when shedding happens. God says shedding is not loss when it is seasonal. It is preparation. You have mourned what God was removing. You called it failure. God called it transition. When you hold on to what God is releasing, pain increases. When you release with trust, renewal comes. God told me to warn you because some of you are holding on to old identities. You refuse to let go of who you were because you are afraid of the unknown. Hair sheds naturally to make room for stronger strands. God says, let go. What is coming requires space. What is coming requires renewal. There is also a message for those who neglect themselves completely. You give to everyone. You serve constantly. You pour out without replenishing. God says neglect is not holiness. Burnout is not sacrifice. You were never called to destroy yourself to prove devotion. God says, honor the vessel I gave you. When you honor the vessel, the oil flows without obstruction. Your hair responds to nourishment. Without nourishment, it weakens. God says your spirit is the same. You cannot survive on inspiration alone. You need consistent nourishment, quiet moments, stillness, listening, alignment. When nourishment returns, strength returns. Some of you are impatient with God because answers are not coming quickly. God says answers are already forming, but formation takes time. If God gave you everything instantly, you would collapse under the weight. Delay is mercy. Process is protection. God told me to warn you because pride has disguised itself as independence in this generation. You say you need no covering, no guidance, no correction. God says what has no covering dries out. Even the strongest structures require balance. Even the tallest trees require roots. Even the head requires alignment. Your hair grows downward as much as it grows upward. God says true elevation always includes humility. Those who rise without humility fall without warning. God is training you to carry weight without breaking. Some of you are overly focused on controlling outcomes. You want guarantees before obedience. God says obedience precedes understanding. Hair does not know where it will end when it begins to grow. It simply follows design. God says, trust the design. There is power released when awareness replaces ignorance. Today, God is not condemning you. God is awakening you. Awakening is uncomfortable because it requires responsibility. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you understand, you cannot pretend. But with awareness comes authority. God told me to warn you because the next season will require clarity of head and steadiness of spirit. Those who are distracted will miss timing. Those who are aligned will move effortlessly. This is not about effort. This is about positioning. Your hair rests where your thoughts originate. God says, guard your thoughts, not with fear, but with truth. Thoughts shape posture. Posture shapes direction. Direction shapes destiny. As this word settles, God is observing how you respond internally. Not with emotion, but with alignment. Not with agreement alone, but with adjustment. Because adjustment is the evidence of understanding. This message is not mystical. It is practical wisdom revealed spiritually. God always reveals truth in simple forms. Those who dismiss simplicity miss power. Those who honor it walk in strength. And now God is calling you to awareness in daily life, in the small moments, in the quiet routines, in how you wake, how you rest, how you wait, how you trust, how you submit, how you release control, how you allow growth without panic, how you respect what is forming before it is visible, how you align before you demand, how you listen before you act, because what God is preparing to release next will not respond to noise, haste, or force, but to those who have learned alignment at the level of the head, the heart, and the unseen. Those who understand that nothing God created is accidental, that every detail carries instruction, and that awareness is the doorway through which authority quietly enters and begins to work without announcement, without striving, without fear, unfolding according to divine order as those who are attentive move forward while others remain unaware of what has been speaking to them all along, resting silently above them, growing patiently, waiting for recognition, waiting for honor, waiting for alignment as God continues to speak through what you once thought was ordinary but was always carrying more meaning than you imagined, revealing that destiny often begins with understanding what has been with you since the beginning, calling you now to see, to discern, to align, and to move differently from this moment forward as the unfolding continues without interruption and without conclusion. God is pressing further now because awareness without response becomes responsibility. When God reveals something, neutrality is no longer an option. You either align or you resist. And resistance is never passive. It quietly hardens the heart. Go. D says many people think resistance is rebellion, but more often it is neglect. You heard, but you did not adjust. You understood, but you did not respond. And over time, what was once a whisper becomes silence, not because God stopped speaking, but because you stopped honoring what was spoken. There is a sacred rhythm God established in creation, and your life is meant to move within that rhythm, not against it. Your hair grows in cycles, growth, rest, renewal, and God says your spirit follows the same divine order. When you refuse rest, growth weakens. When you ignore renewal, stagnation sets in. Some of you are frustrated because you feel stuck. But God says you have been trying to stay in a season that already ended. You prayed for movement, but you resisted transition. God says, discern the cycle. What worked before may not serve you now. What sustained you then may need to be released today. God told me to warn you also about how you respond to pressure. Hair under constant tension breaks. Faith under constant strain does the same. Pressure was never meant to be permanent. God allows pressure to shape, not to destroy. When you live under pressure without release, without surrender, without trust, you begin to fracture internally. God says, come back to balance. Balance is not compromise, it is alignment with divine design. Some of you have been living with a divided focus. Your mind is in many places at once. You are pulled by demands, expectations, and fears. God says, divided focus weakens authority. When the head turns in every direction, the body loses stability. God is calling you to singular devotion, not obsession, but clarity. When you know who you answer to, confusion loses its power. Your hair also reveals how you handle truth. When truth comes, do you receive it gently or do you immediately reshape it to fit your comfort? God says truth cannot be reshaped without being weakened. When you twist truth to avoid discomfort, you delay freedom. God speaks truth not to shame you, but to strengthen you. What challenges you today will protect you tomorrow. God is also addressing those who fear exposure because of past mistakes. You think if people really see you, you will be rejected. But God says exposure under divine covering brings healing, not harm. When God uncovers something, it is never to destroy, it is to restore. You have hidden too long. Hiding has become a habit. God says, step into the light of truth. What is healed does not need to hide. Some of you have been obsessed with control because you grew up in chaos. Control feels like safety. But God says control is an illusion that exhausts the soul. Hair grows whether you control it or not. God says, learn to trust again. Trust is not naivety, it is confidence in divine order. When you release control, you make room for peace. God told me to warn you because many people confuse spiritual activity with spiritual maturity. You are busy but not deep, active but not aligned. God says maturity shows in how you wait, not in how you rush. Waiting reveals trust. Waiting reveals humility. Waiting reveals faith. Those who cannot wait do not yet understand authority. There is also a call here to those who have judged others by appearance. You assumed condition by surface. God says you misread the signs. Growth can look messy before it looks glorious. Process often looks like disorder before it reveals design. God warns you to be careful how you interpret what you see. Discernment requires patience. Your hair grows from the root unseen. God says real change always starts where people cannot applaud. If you only change what people can see, transformation will not last. God is calling you back to root work, private alignment, unseen obedience, quiet faithfulness. When roots are strong, storms do not destroy. Some of you are afraid of being ordinary. You chase uniqueness because you fear insignificance. God says faithfulness is never ordinary. Obedience is never small. What God honors is not spectacle but surrender. Hair grows the same way on every head, yet no two heads are identical. God says you do not need to strive to be unique. You are already designed. God told me to warn you also about how you respond to correction. Correction is not rejection. Correction is care. When God corrects, it is proof of involvement. Indifference is far more dangerous than discipline. God corrects what God intends to elevate. Those who reject correction disqualify themselves. Is prematurely. Some of you have been numbed by disappointment. Makes it more by now. You thought life would look different. God says disappointment becomes dangerous when it turns into cynicism. Cynicism closes the heart. A closed heart cannot receive. God is calling you to hope again. Not shallow optimism, but grounded trust. Your hair reminds you daily that life continues even when you are tired, even when you are discouraged, even when you are unaware. God says, I am still working. Even when you feel stuck, formation continues. Even when you feel unseen, growth persists. This is not denial of pain. It is assurance of purpose. God is also speaking to those who have spiritual knowledge without wisdom. Knowledge informs, but wisdom aligns. Wisdom knows when to act and when to wait. Wisdom knows when to speak and when to be silent. Hair teaches restraint. It does not force growth. It submits to time. God says, learn restraint. Some of you have been offended by silence. You think silence means absence. God says silence often means preparation. Before great shifts, there is quiet. Before breakthrough, there is stillness. Before revelation, there is waiting. God says, do not mistake silence for neglect. God told me to warn you because the next level of responsibility requires greater alignment. Authority without alignment becomes dangerous. Power without wisdom destroys. God prepares before God releases. Those who refuse preparation will struggle under weight they asked. For there is a refining happening now, not dramatic, not loud, subtle, internal. God is adjusting perception, posture, expectation. This refining will not announce itself, but its effects will be undeniable. Those who submit will find ease where there was strain. Those who resist will feel friction increase. Your hair will continue to grow whether you acknowledge it or not. God says truth is the same. Truth does not need your permission. It operates by divine law. The question is not whether it is working, but whether you are aligned with it. God is calling you to live with reverence again. Not fear, but awareness. Awareness that nothing in your life is random. Awareness that everything speaks. Awareness that God uses the simple to instruct the wise. Awareness that alignment precedes manifestation. As this word continues to unfold within you, God is not demanding perfection. God is inviting attentiveness. Attentiveness changes everything. When you become attentive, you stop missing signals. You stop rushing seasons. You stop fighting processes that were meant to form you. And now, God is watching how you carry this awareness into your daily life, into your routines, into your decisions, into how you wait, how you listen, how you respond under pressure, how you honor what grows quietly, how you release what no longer serves divine purpose, how you trust the unseen work, how you align your thoughts, your posture, your expectations, because what God is doing now is not external. First, but internal, not loud but deep, not immediate but lasting, shaping you in ways that will only make sense later, calling you to walk with a steadiness that does not depend on applause, a confidence that does not require validation, a faith that rests in divine order even when outcomes are not yet visible, continuing to work patiently, silently, faithfully as alignment deepens and awareness sharpens and the unfolding remains in motion without pause, without explanation, without finality, as the process continues to speak and shape and guide beyond what can be measured or rushed or concluded at this moment. God is now confronting the deeper layer, because revelation always exposes stewardship. Once you know, you are accountable. God never reveals to impress, God reveals to entrust. What you do with understanding determines what you will be trusted with next. Many ask for more from God while mishandling what they already perceive. God says stewardship begins with awareness. You cannot steward what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot protect what you treat casually, and you cannot carry greater authority while neglecting smaller signs that were meant to train you. Your head is the seat of decision, and your hair rests where decisions are formed. God says your decisions have been rushed because your inner world has not been settled. When the mind is unsettled, choices become reactive instead of guided. God is calling you out of reaction and into discernment. Discernment is not suspicion, it is clarity. Clarity comes when the noise quiets, and quiet comes when you trust God enough to pause. Some of you have been making vows in moments of emotion, promises born out of pressure rather than conviction. God says integrity is revealed over time, not in intensity. Hair does not prove health by how fast it grows, but by how strong it remains. God is teaching you endurance. Endurance reveals sincerity. Those who endure are those who understood what they committed to. There is also a generational message hidden here. What rests on your head is not only personal, it is inherited. Patterns travel through families when they are not confronted with awareness. God says some of you are breaking cycles without realizing it. Others are repeating cycles because they never examined them. Awareness interrupts repetition. When you see clearly, you choose differently. God told me to warn you because many people blame spiritual resistance when the real issue is misalignment. Not everything that feels heavy is an attack. Sometimes it is friction from walking against design. God says, return to alignment and resistance will lessen. This is not denial of struggle, it is instruction for relief. Your hair responds to care, not force. God says your life is the same. You cannot force fruitfulness, you cultivate it. Cultivation requires patience, consistency, and attention. Those who neglect daily care and hope for sudden results will always be disappointed. God honors steady faithfulness more than dramatic moments. Some of you have been ashamed of vulnerability. You think strength means never being exposed. God says strength is knowing where to be covered and where to be open. Wisdom discerns timing. Even growth needs protection in its early stages. God never exposes prematurely. When God reveals, it is because strength has developed underneath. God is also addressing those who have become harsh with themselves. You speak to yourself without mercy. You criticize every imperfection. God says condemnation is not correction. Condemnation paralyzes. Correction strengthens. God corrects with hope. When you speak to yourself without hope, you distort God's voice. Learn to agree with God's tone, not just God's truth. Some of you are carrying guilt that God already released. You keep revisiting what has been addressed. God says remembrance without purpose becomes bondage. Hair grows forward, not backward. God says stop living behind what I already healed. Forward movement requires trust in restoration. God told me to warn you because the next phase will require emotional discipline. Not emotional suppression, but discipline. Discipline knows how to feel without being ruled by feeling. Hair does not change direction because of emotion. It follows structure. God is strengthening your inner structure. There is also a call here to humility in success. When things begin to grow, pride tries to enter quietly. God says pride is subtle. It disguises itself as confidence. True confidence remains teachable. The moment you stop listening is the moment growth begins to weaken. Stay teachable. Stay aligned. God is refining your sense of identity. Identity rooted in God is stable. Identity rooted in approval is fragile. Hair does not ask permission to grow. God says, stop asking permission to become who I design. Approval will always fluctuate. Divine design does not. Some of you have been overwhelmed by options, too many voices, too many directions. God says simplicity restores clarity. When you simplify, you hear again. When you hear again, you move with confidence. Complexity is not depth. Often it is distraction. God told me to warn you because many have mistaken urgency for importance. Not everything urgent is important. Hair grows steadily, not frantically. God is teaching you to prioritize according to purpose, not pressure. When purpose leads, peace follows. Your daily habits are shaping your future more than your occasional prayers. God says consistency builds capacity. Capacity determines how much you can carry without breaking. Hair thickens gradually. God increases strength the same way. Do not despise small disciplines. Some of you are afraid of being still because stillness exposes thoughts you have avoided. God says stillness is where healing begins. When you slow down, truth surfaces. When truth surfaces, freedom becomes possible. Do not fear what God wants to heal. God is also reminding you that timing matters. Acting too early can be as damaging as acting too late. Haircut before maturity cannot fulfill its purpose. God says, wait until alignment confirms timing. Obedience without timing creates unnecessary struggle. God told me to warn you because authority is increasing for those who are aligned. But authority amplifies what is already present. If insecurity remains, it will be amplified. If humility remains, it will be amplified. God refines before God elevates. Your life is being shaped quietly. Others may not notice yet. That does not mean nothing is happening. God works beneath the surface first. Those who trust the unseen will be ready when the visible appears. God is calling you to live with intentional awareness, not hyper-focus, but reverence. Reverence that sees meaning where others see routine. Reverence that listens before speaking. Reverence that honors growth even when it is slow. As this word continues to move within you, God is not rushing you. God is inviting you to walk differently, to think differently, to respond differently, to honor what has been speaking all along through patience, through growth, through quiet formation, calling you into deeper alignment, deeper trust, deeper discernment, shaping your steps without force, without haste, without fear, continuing to work within you as awareness sharp. And as posture adjusts and understanding deepens, unfolding layer by layer as you learn to walk in rhythm with divine order, carrying what God places upon your life with steadiness and humility, allowing the process to continue without resistance, without conclusion, without final declaration, as the forming goes on beyond this moment and into what is still becoming. God is now shifting the lens again because revelation matures as you mature. What you understand today is not what you understood yesterday. And God does not waste growth. Every layer of awareness is preparation for weight. Weight is responsibility. Responsibility is trust. God entrusts weight only to those who have learned how to carry without collapsing. That is why God often waits longer than you expect. It is not delay, it is strengthening. Your life is being trained to hold what your prayers asked for without breaking under it. You must hear this clearly. God is not impressed by urgency. God responds to obedience. Many people try to pressure heaven with desperation, but God listens for alignment, not volume. When your inner posture aligns with divine order, response flows without struggle. Hair does not shout to grow. It aligns with design, and growth happens. God says, stop striving for response and start aligning with instruction. Some of you are wrestling with identity because you are between stages. You are no longer who you were, but you have not yet seen who you are becoming. That in-between place, that feels uncomfortable. God says discomfort does not mean confusion, it means transition. Hair looks awkward between lengths, but that does not mean growth has stopped. God says, do not judge yourself mid-process. What you are becoming requires patience with the in-between. God told me to warn you also about how you respond to stillness. Stillness reveals what noise was hiding. Many people stay busy because busyness numbs fear. But God says healing requires courage to be still. When you stop running, truth catches up. And when truth catches up, freedom becomes possible. Stillness is not stagnation, it is recalibration. There are some who have been offended by simplicity. You want complexity because complexity feels intelligent. But God often speaks in simplicity because simplicity requires humility. Pride resists simple instruction. Humility receives it. Hair teaches simplicity. It grows by doing one thing consistently. God says, return to simple obedience. Complicated faith collapses under pressure. Simple faith endures. God is also addressing your relationship with time. You feel behind. You feel late. You feel like you missed something. God says time is not your enemy. Impatience is. When you rush time, you sabotage readiness. Hair that grows too fast without strength breaks easily. God is not slow. God is precise. Some of you have confused endurance with endurance alone. You endure, but you do not enjoy. God says, endurance without joy becomes bitterness. Bitterness poisons growth. God wants you to endure with trust, not with resentment. Trust changes the weight of waiting. God told me to warn you because some of you have allowed disappointment to reshape your expectations downward. You stopped expecting fully because you were tired of being let down. God says guarded expectations may protect your feelings, but they limit your faith. Faith is not denial of pain, it is confidence beyond it. Lift your expectations back to alignment. Not fantasy, but trust. Your hair grows even when you are unaware of it. God says divine work often continues beyond your awareness. You may not feel progress, but formation is happening. Feelings are unreliable measures of growth. Consistency is the true indicator. God is not dependent on your emotions to work. God is also speaking to those who are overly harsh with others. You judge quickly, you conclude prematurely. God says judgment reveals impatience with process. You want finished results without respecting formation. God calls you to compassion. Compassion understands growth takes time. Some of you have been spiritually fatigued because you have been fighting battles you were never called to fight. You react to everything. You defend constantly. God says discernment knows what to engage and what to ignore. Hair does not fight wind, it bends without breaking. God is teaching you flexibility without compromise. God told me to warn you because flexibility is not weakness. Rigid faith snaps under pressure. Flexible faith adapts without losing truth. God is unchanging, but methods adjust with seasons. Those who refuse to adjust will struggle unnecessarily. Your mind has been crowded with unnecessary weight, thoughts that do not serve purpose, worries that do not belong to you. God says mental discipline is spiritual stewardship. What you allow to rest on your mind affects how you move forward. Clear the space, make room for clarity. God is also refining your relationship with silence. Silence is where wisdom matures. Noise demands reaction. Silence invites reflection. God often waits in silence to see if you will trust without reassurance. Trust that requires constant reassurance is not yet mature. Some of you are afraid of making the wrong decision, so you make no decision. God says paralysis is not caution. It is fear disguised as wisdom. Growth requires movement. Hair grows forward, not frozen. God says, Move with guidance, not fear. God told me to warn you, because the next season will expose foundations. What is built on alignment will stand. What is built on image will crack. God is not threatening, God is preparing. Preparation is mercy. Your daily choices are shaping tomorrow's strength. What you do consistently matters more than what you do occasionally. God honors patterns, not promises. Build patterns that support growth. God is also addressing those who feel unseen. You think your faithfulness does not matter because no one applauds it. God says unseen obedience carries great weight. Heaven records what earth ignores. Promotion often begins where no one is watching. Some of you have mistaken ease for confirmation. Not everything easy is right. And not everything difficult is wrong. Discernment weighs alignment, not comfort. Hair grows through resistance of the scalp, yet that resistance does not stop it. God says resistance does not always mean rejection. God told me to warn you because spiritual maturity requires emotional honesty. Not emotional control alone, but honesty. God already knows what you feel. When you deny it, you delay healing. Speak truthfully in the presence of God, and strength will replace suppression. God is refining your ability to wait without losing hope. Waiting with hope is faith in motion. Waiting without hope is endurance without vision. God says, hold vision even when progress is quiet. As this word continues to work within you, God is not asking you to do more, but to see differently. To respond with discernment instead of impulse, to trust process instead of pressure, to honor what is forming quietly, to release what no longer aligns, to walk with steadiness rather than haste, to allow awareness to shape obedience and obedience to deepen trust, continuing to move forward without rushing the outcome, without forcing the process, without demanding conclusions, as the unfolding continues under divine order, layer by layer, unseen yet intentional, forming strength that will soon be evident without announcement, without strain, without final declaration, as the work remains in motion beyond this moment and into what is still unfolding. Now hear this with the weight it deserves, because God is not calling you to information, but to transformation. This moment is not passing by accident. God has allowed your awareness to be stirred because alignment must begin somewhere, and it begins with humility. Humility to examine your life without excuses. Humility to admit where you rushed, where you resisted, where you ignored what was quietly teaching you all along. God is not asking you to feel condemned. God is asking you to feel awakened. Awakening is the doorway to renewal. Stand still within yourself for a moment and let truth speak louder than habit. Ask yourself where you have been misaligned. Ask yourself where you have been impatient with process. Ask yourself where fear has shaped your decisions more than trust. God is not afraid of your honesty. God responds to it. When you bring truth into the open, God meets you with clarity, not judgment. This is the call. Slow down enough to listen again. Lay down the need to control outcomes. Release the pressure to perform. Return to reverence. Let your life come back under divine order. When you align, strength replaces striving. When you trust, peace replaces anxiety. When you honor what God is forming, authority rises naturally. Do not leave this moment unchanged. Adjustment is the proof of understanding. Decide today to walk with awareness. Decide to honor process. Decide to guard your thoughts. Decide to rest when God calls you to rest, and move when God calls you to move. Decide to live with intention instead of impulse, with discernment instead of distraction. God is closer than you think, not because you reached higher, but because you yielded deeper. Let your heart bow. Let your mind quiet. Let your posture align. God does not require perfection, only surrender. And when surrender becomes your posture, alignment becomes your path. Carry this awareness with reverence. Let it shape how you think, how you choose, how you wait, how you grow. Walk forward knowing that nothing about your life is random, that every detail carries purpose, and that God is faithfully working even when the process feels silent. Step into alignment. Walk with trust. Live with awareness. And let your life quietly testify that when you honor divine order, God's presence becomes evident without striving, without noise, without fear, steady and strong, resting upon you as you move forward in peace.